Okay, we'll give people a couple more minutes to get in here, but thank you everyone for joining us over your lunch hour today. And if you're watching this on our resource library, thank you for watching it on demand as well. My name is Ali Herndon. I am West Communications Coordinator, and I want to give a big shout out to our webinar sponsor, our info sponsor, Peter Lucas Project Management. So thank you so much to them. Our topic today is learn how the Scientific Research and Experimental Development Program can help your business. And it's presented by Daniah McCall of Infinity SRED Solutions Inc. So if you have any questions as we go along, you can put them in the chat box, or you can hop on your camera, turn on your mic, ask your questions that way. And like I said before, this is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand it on over.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Ali, for the introduction there. Just one moment, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen with you. Okay, can everybody see that PowerPoint up there? Or Ali, can you confirm that?
Yes, it looks good.
Okay, perfect. I'll get started here. So again, thank you all for joining me this afternoon here and over your lunch hour. Appreciate your time. As Ali mentioned, my name is Daniah McCall. I'm the CEO of Infinity SRED Solutions here located in Saskatchewan. We were just talking right before we jumped onto the presentation here. We're actually located just next door to Wesk. So probably throw a stone and hit Ali's window here. So yeah, let's get into the presentation here. So I think everybody knows what we're about to talk about here, the Scientific Research and Experimental Development, better known as the acronym SR&ED. I'm going to refer to it as SRED throughout this presentation. But just before we jump into things, I was thinking, preparing this presentation, why people are here. Why are people wanting to learn about a tax program over their noon hour? And just, I know we can't get a bunch of comments right now, but generally what we hear a lot of times is, hey, I heard we can maybe get some money from the government. How can we do that? What is this SRED program? I don't do any scientific research. I don't do any experimental development. How can I qualify? So generally why I'm bringing that up is we know what we're going to talk about. I'm going to go through some of those definitions that they apply to the why you may be applicable, your business may be applicable for this program. But my goal here is at the end of this presentation to give all of you a better some tools and some ideas of where your company might fit in and perhaps qualify, and you can take advantage of the program. So that being said, number one, before we get to the next slide and a little more about us, I want you guys or everybody here to forget about the word scientific research. Just focus on the ED. That's what we're going to talk about here in this presentation. 95% of the CRA's claims for SRED claims are based on the experimental development side. That's more your product or process development. I think that's what's more applicable and most applicable with most companies here doing business. The scientific research side is more of your basic or applied research, more at that university level. So we're going to overlook that part of it because 99% of our claimants are on the ED side of it. Who we are. So Infinity SRED Solutions, and I'll just call it Infinity Solutions. We are a fully dedicated SRED consulting firm. As I mentioned, we are local here in Saskatoon. So what I mean by that is all we do is help companies like yourselves with preparing and submitting SR&ED claims. We don't do any other tax services. We don't file any T2s. We just focus on this program here. So that's how we became experts in working with this particular program. So we use engineering and accounting backgrounds over the decade or so experience working with this to prepare these claims. My background's actually in chemical engineering. So I'm a big part of working with the claimant in preparing the technical reports, doing the technical write-ups, which we're going to talk about here in this presentation. So there's two parts of it I should take from this too. There is the technical aspect of it and the accounting side of it. So we'll go through that in a little more detail. So then over the years, we've been around 11, 12 years. Really, the reason why we're still around is we have a good reputation with the CRA, and what we believe is with this process, the SRED process, it's all about integrity. And we also want to maximize claims for our dollars for our claimants as well too. So it's a bit of that balancing act in understanding our claimant, our client, and preparing the claims that way. So really over the years of putting together our consulting methods, we've really built our reputation of integrity, doing a good job, and also really uncovering and maximizing those potential dollars for the clients there. A quick overview. First off, what is SR&ED? I'm going to touch a little bit more on those just overview details. And on each slide, I kind of have a little bit of a portion of it where I want to pop out, and you guys can take away at the end of this and remember that could be crucial for taking your next step and maybe looking a little further into the program. So I'm going to tell you what is SR&ED, what are those definitions. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of those two parts we talked about and why it's a niche program. We're going to talk about those technical aspects and the accounting criteria that you need to meet in order to qualify and put a claim in. And ultimately, why you're here is what can it mean for your company. And that's really going to focus on the dollar side of it here. After meeting those criteria, getting a claim in, how does the cookie crumble in terms of what in recouping those expenditures and what you can get back for your company. And then also the claim process, just generally, how would you navigate preparing, putting together and submitting the claim, and what happens after you submit a claim and what you can expect, and a little bit how a consultant can help that way. And then lastly, generally how a consultant can help there as well. First, number one, the SR&ED program. So it is a tax credit program. It provides more than $3 billion of tax credits each year. It is by far the federal government's largest source of federal government funding for R&D across Canada. So one other program that I see a lot of people take advantage of is NRC's IRAP program that some people may or may not be familiar with. But number one, programs like that have a cap. They have a set budget where they might have $300 million allotted to them from the government, and they can't exceed that. So they're limited to what they can give back to people in a year. And whereas the SR&ED program, it does not have a cap. So $3 billion is just a rough estimate, but it can be $4 billion, whatever it is, depending, as long as the claimants, that make up that year meet the criteria. So each year there's roughly about 16,000 claimants, and many of these are small businesses. So keep that in mind. It doesn't matter if you're small, big, or large. You can perhaps qualify for this. And one word I want to point out in there is the word claimants. I mentioned IRAP and those different NRC programs. A lot of people say this is a SR&ED grant, an SR&ED grant. This is not a grant. A grant is something you apply for, like IRAP, ahead of time, and you hopefully get the dollars, and then you apply it, and you can budget your fiscal year end based on that. We're looking, and I'll get into this, but we're looking to recoup expenditures that are already gone. You've put these costs towards whatever product or process or whatever you're developing that fits the SR&ED claim, and we're looking to recover those, and then recover that through the claims process, and then hopefully get you guys back a check that you can put towards further development or into the business. This program has been around for a while. It's been around since 1985, and again, to encourage business of all sizes to conduct R&D. So some of you may have heard of it, some may have not. And a lot of times we get some of the businesses that have been around for a decade, we work with, we end up working with them, and we get them back some dollars, hopefully, and they say, oh, I wish I would have heard of this 10 years ago. So there is a limitation on how far we can go back, to that comment. It is administered by the Canadian Revenue Agency, the CRA, so it is filed with your T2. So it's based on fiscal year ends. So there is an 18-month, and I want you guys to focus on this, because this is important while you're thinking of maybe I can go back in time and potentially qualify. There's an 18-month hard filing deadline that you can submit a claim. Now, let's use a December 31st fiscal year end as an example. Your December 31st, 2020 year end is long past, and there's been 12 months go by in calendar 2020, then add an additional 6 months to that, which would be January, February, March, April, May, June, the month we're in right now. So If you have, which is common, a December 31st year end, and we're talking about specifically about 2020, you have until the end of this month, June 30th, to file an SR&ED claim in that particular tax year. And, likely we'll be filing an amendment request on your T2 with the SR&ED schedules to go in there. So just so I want everybody to understand, you can't go back, hey, I heard about this, I want to go back 3-5 years because we did something really innovative 3, 4, 5 years ago. Unfortunately, we do have time constraints there. So keep that in mind. I mean, especially if you're December 31st year end. But as your year end is offset, the deadline moves with that. So what businesses receive are incentives in the form of tax refunds and credits. So I want to also make this clear to everybody that some people might be thinking, well, great, I get a tax credit. That doesn't help me. I'm a tech startup, or just the way I do my accounting, I keep my taxation very low with expenditures and dividending out or I wouldn't say, but basically keeping your taxation low in that corporation. That's not going to help offsetting taxes. The powerful thing about this program is in the federal portion, and as well in particular in Saskatchewan, provincial portion as well, businesses qualify for a refundable tax credit. Now, what does that mean? I still said tax credit, but I said refundable in front of that. What that means is doesn't matter if you have taxes owing, you will get back cash. So it's not just offsetting taxes if you have no taxes owing, it's cash. So it's huge where if you qualify, you get a check that shows up after everything's done here, and you submit it from there, or you can put it back into your business from there. So two things: we realize where your fiscal year end is, where you fit in that timeline, and this is a refundable tax credit, cash. So think of that going forward if it's worth time pursuing. So the claims themselves, jump into the technical side of it first. The SR&ED claims, you have to submit technical write-ups for each SR&ED project that you have within that fiscal year. So their words are, it's a search or investigation in a field of science or technology for the attempt to achieve a technological advancement. So a lot of words there, we're going to get into that, but the big one to take from there is that word attempt. For business owners, managers, whatever the technical person is, it's tough to maybe go back and think about those products or processes that you developed or whatever you're working on that failed. However, failure sometimes can highlight SR&ED. It can show that you had some challenges, some obstacles that you encountered along the way. So I want to, from this slide, I want people to understand that for those technical write-ups or projects that we put in within that fiscal year, they don't all have to be successful projects or products or what have you in the innovation side. A technological advancement, we're going to touch on that, is what knowledge was gained. If you failed going down certain pathways trying to achieve whatever you're trying to make or create, you're still gaining knowledge and advancing your company's knowledge there. So anyways, keep that in mind too. You can look back and say, hey, we worked, we did multiple iterations to develop this product here. We failed and we scrapped it. That might be, a good starting point for discussions or turning the light bulb on for a technical project for SR&ED. Like I mentioned, in a fiscal year, you can have multiple projects. And I should also say that those projects don't have to start and end within that fiscal year. They can cross multiple fiscal years. They don't have to end in 2 years, 3 years. They can technically go on indefinitely as long as you're still continuing to meet that criteria, which we're going to talk about here a little more. So those project reports, like I said, it could be multiple different project reports, but these reports themselves are split up into some specific criteria they would like you to meet in order to qualify. So this criteria, it's a set of interrelated activities that collectively are necessary for the attempt, again, that word attempt shows up in there, to achieve a technological advancement or learn something. So number one, in their words, what they want to see is they want to know what your technological uncertainty was. And we're going to touch on that in the next slide, but generally, for a presentation like this, what we're talking about there is, what were those obstacles, I mentioned challenges or roadblocks, whatever word you want to use, encountered during product or process development? What stopped you? What made you've exhausted all of your, expertise in-house, all the readily available knowledge in the public domain, and you're like, hey, I don't know what to do next year. We have to identify how to overcome this or what we should do. So secondly, they want to know, okay, you've run into that challenge. Now, what what work was done, how was the work done to try to overcome that. So they like to see a systematic investigation or search. So they want to see a systematic approach carried out by means of experimentation analysis. So they want a description of how you tried to specifically address that technological uncertainty or those obstacles that you ran into. And they want to see it in an iterative chronological process there, clearly laying out step by step what worked, what didn't work, and why was that tested. And then lastly is the why. Why are you doing all this? It's for the technological advance, but they want to describe that statement or what was learned, what new knowledge was gained, what data was generated. They want a description of that. So those are really what's a breakdown and kind of an eagle eye view of what we need to provide to the CRA to describe them how this particular SR&ED project fits the underlying criteria. Now, I mentioned I was going to talk a little more about the technological uncertainty, which I find is kind of the main, in all the technical reviews I've been in this year and last year, and even more so in the last 3-4 years, this is really what the CRA reviewers, and I'll touch more about the process and the review side of it later on, but what they want to understand is what is that challenge and an obstacle. So their words, so it's technological uncertainty means whether an objective can be achieved or not determined on the basis of generally available technological knowledge or experience. So it's kind of a mouthful there, but again, going back to what I mentioned in the previous slide, it's really, I used to always use a coffee cup analogy where you have your coffee cup in front of you, it's half full. You start working on a project, all that, the coffee that's in there, that's all the experience. You might have an engineer on staff, a tech person. They've exhausted all their attempts. They've searched out for consultants to try to solve it, or contractors, or just general public knowledge. And maybe a competitor's doing it, but it's a trade secret or proprietary. They don't know what to do. So once you've really exhausted that, that's when the SR&ED project starts. That's kind of what I want to focus here. So it's it really is the key piece of technical criteria that we have to put forward in our argument if we are in a technical review and express how in this particular SR&ED project case for this company was met. Now, I don't want to focus too much on this because with an overview presentation like this, but a lot of times what I do see and a lot of confusion is the difference between a technical uncertainty and a technological uncertainty. Just to really summarize it, a technical uncertainty, I like to use, it's more where you fall into that realm, in my opinion, of trial and error, where you don't really have that systematic approach and you're not, you're just, you might, something broke in the field, you had a widget you tested, you brought it back, oh, there wasn't enough strength here, I just changed the material, put it back in the field and it worked. Or maybe there was 1 or 2 iterations similar to that, but it was, you knew the material strength, you knew it was, from the published sources, it was just maybe an oversight on the engineering side of it, what have you. But there was no experimentation per se. There was no analysis and looking at the data and going through that in a systematic fashion. That comes more back to that, like I mentioned, the trial and error. So we want to, that's one way to kind of separate the two quickly, is trial and error doesn't qualify. We need to have that experimentation and analysis that way through this technological uncertainty, where you need to create an experiment or test to gain this knowledge. And then ultimately, either if you're doing that work to address that technological uncertainty, but ultimately, even if you don't end up achieving that objective of overcoming that uncertainty, or you do, and your product or process is successful, they want to know, what the whole purpose of this is, achieving that advancement, or I said that new knowledge. So in the end, like I said, that last part, we need to explain how the activities completed generate that information that advances understanding of their specific industry. And that's your advancement statement. And then lastly, I have in here just a quick little bullet is documentation. I mentioned kind of separating the two, that trial and error versus a systematic investigation. Well, what does that mean? I like to say, if you're not writing anything down, maybe writing's not the right word, but if you're not having some documents that you're generating while you're going through the process of the systematic investigation, you're probably not learning anything. That'd probably be more trial and error. So we want to see some form of record keeping that supports the work that was done. Now, there's kind of two parts of documentation here. A lot of people, they get really hung up on time tracking specific to SR&ED projects. That's very important if you can do that, but it's also very time consuming. What I'm talking about here is what I see and how I consult is it keeping that technical documentation that's commensurate or created at the same time during the life of the project that supports a claim. Like for a tech company, that might be Jira logs or whatever software management system you have. It could be something as simple as emails or spreadsheets, timestamp photos, something to justify the time that we have towards that. So a lot of people get hung up, well, how do I justify this? You know, the evidence that you have that you might not even know just on your smartphone or just through emails or for the back and forth with a contractor or something, that might be enough to support your SR&ED claim. And part of that writing down aspect, I'm saying, showing that systematic investigation, overcoming that obstacle, and then ultimately talking about your new knowledge that you've gained for your company. So that's just a quick overview. I know there's a lot said there, but that's generally what, on the technical side of it, what they're going to be looking for. So just to kind of conclude that side of it is, one thing you probably noticed here, I didn't talk about specific industries or what type of industries fit best. Typically, it doesn't matter what your industry is. As long as you're a Canadian controlled private corporation in Canada and you're doing something that fits this criteria, like for example, we don't have a restaurant client, but let's just say you are a restaurant, but you're trying to develop, you hire a software person to develop a specific a platform or something to improve the way you're setting your tables or what have you on the business side. But there's something in that particular tool or piece of that software that fits this program. But generally, your day-to-day business is a restaurant. The CRE doesn't care about that. They want to focus on what work was done that fits this criteria and how we can recoup the cost towards that. So going back to the opening statement there, people are wondering, perhaps, is this even right for me? Why am I here? Does this qualify? It may. You might don't pigeonhole yourself into, oh, I do this, but there might be certain aspects or parts of your business that could qualify. It all comes back to, as long as we're fitting this technical criteria here specific to the program. Kind of flipping the coin now over to, that was kind of an overview on the technical aspect and that side. We're going to talk more on the financial or the accounting side. So what, like I mentioned, it's a claims process. So we go back and what eligible expenditures could make up an SR&ED claim. So the first one and the big one, we should call it out there, is labor or salaried employees or T4 labor, whatever you want to call it. There's two types of employees on here, not to get too much in the details. There's non-specified employees. So that's employees that do not own any shares in the company. And then there's specified employees. So that could be owner or a minority owner or something that owns over 10%. A lot of times there's a perception that they may not qualify for that, but they do. So basically anybody that's taking a T4, as long as they're doing some activities involved in that SR&ED project to meet that technical criteria, labor makes up probably 80% of the claims. And the next part is overheads. Again, it's, I think, pretty straightforward. That's, all the overheads like electrical, cell phone bills, those typical office expenses and stuff like that, and consumables and testing and stuff that are used by these employees as they work through a project. I have on here, there's traditional proxy method. 99% of the time I use a proxy method. I won't get into details, but basically it is I call it a percent or a fudge factor that kind of gives you a general catch-all to optimize your overheads expenses towards labor. The traditional method is more going through receipts and shoe boxes and trying to figure out what parts fit the SR&ED claim. It's much more time consuming, and generally everybody opts towards the proxy method. And I'll explain more why later, how it's more advantageous to tech companies and startups as well too, that may have some lower overheads. Third, materials. So materials consumed or transformed. So I think an easy example of this is if you built a prototype and you put it out for testing and you completely rendered it useless. It's scrap at the end. You're not going to sell it. All the materials that went into making that prototype are likely claimable, and the work, the labor that the individuals or the contractor that built that prototype are claimable as well. Transforms, not very commonly used. It's if you write those off as consumed in 1 year, but you might be able to sell it at a later time. We might have to claw that back at a later date, but not as likely there. Next is subcontractor consulting fees. For example, maybe we'll go back to that restaurant example. You might not have the in-house expertise in-house to work on whatever project you're looking to do. So you hire a contractor, a software engineer to work on the development, or the SR&ED specific activities for that particular project. These can potentially qualify as well. There's some rules on contractors where we have to make sure the contract is written correctly towards the SR&ED activities, and they're actually performing those activities. And we'll get into that direct SR&ED activities versus indirect. And then lastly, third-party payments, not usually as applicable, but say, for example, you give an in-kind payment to there's an entity like the U of S or something for your industry that's going to improve knowledge for your specific industry. You can write that off through a third-party payment expenditure in the SR&ED program as well too. So everybody's wondering, like, how's a cookie crumble? What does this mean for your company if you find these expenditures towards those activities? This slide's specific to Saskatchewan. Every provincial jurisdiction varies slightly on the percent here, but what that means is you do the calculation on this, your company could receive ITCs, they call them investment tax credits. So there's refundable credits. For every dollar of T4 wages we find, you're looking at recouping about 64 cents on the dollar of labor expenditures. Now, if you look down quickly, you can also see this materials is about 42, and then contractor costs is at the bottom there is at 36 or so percent roughly. You might wonder why it's sliding scale down. Well, remember we talked about that proxy amount for the overheads. Applying that, I would call it a fudge factor that amplifies your labor to get that 64 cents. Materials and contractors your business does not cover their overheads, so the proxy calculation does not apply for overheads to them. So what you can see here is T4 is the big one in terms of getting back these credits. I want you guys to, as you're sitting there listening to this, thinking, a lot of times you hear from business owners is, hey, is it worth my time to do? I mean, if you can look into you go to the next step and pursue this a little further, for 64 cents on the dollar, you quickly find $10,000, $100,000 of T4 income towards a particular project. The claims can scale up quite quickly, and again, it's a refundable credit. So I want you to take away from today too how these percents, that's 64, 42, and 36, because those are generous numbers for recouping your R&D costs. I also just want to comment on here in this particular slide. I mentioned back previous that other grants like IRAP or what have you, and maybe some of you are taking advantage of that. It's like, well, I already have IRAP, so I'm not going to be able to qualify for SR&ED. So you can still qualify for SR&ED, you just cannot double dip on two government programs. So we have to claw back certain portions of the labor that may be covered. Maybe it's up to 80% of a software engineer is covered through IRAP. But basically, just to simplify it quickly for this, we can still recover this proxy or overhead amount. So it almost kind of rounds up that IRAP claim to almost, if it's successful, to 100% of that individual's time, if that person is claimed 100% for SR&ED purposes. I just want lots to take away from this one slide, those percents for those numbers, and also if there is that misconception that I have IRAP or other grants, it's not worth my time. It still can be worth your time to combine the two programs to really maximize your grant and your claims process for your innovation in your company. So just quickly go through some of these slides here. The CRA does have literature that's published out there, what's eligible direct work or activities, to make up that work done. I just want to touch on these because there's many different people in companies and do different activities and how they might fit in to be involved. A lot of times I find I'll use a tech company, for example, their owner might not be a tech person, but how is their time captured, as maybe a higher salaried individual in that company as the owner? Well, there's a lot of work that begins once that technological uncertainty is identified. What are the next steps in that systematic investigation? There's, as you can see here, research and concept development, technical inputs to the project, tech planning. Maybe that individual is telling, part of the hiring process on picking those individuals out to start working on that, and all these different examples here. And then ultimately supervision of SR&ED, meeting minutes, getting updates on what's being done there. So these are all very vague terms, but it's you don't have to be doing these exact things. They just want to know, if you fit underneath the umbrella of these activities, and the many different variations of each project and each company is different that way. So that's one grouping of direct work that could be eligible. And then some of the more direct activities is preparing equipment for experiments, test, or analysis, prototype construction, building a test setup, testing, data collection, analysis, experiment results, knowledge gain. So basically what we're saying here is all of that work that's involved in those experimentation analysis and those iterations that are carried out there, those people that are, I like to call it, in the trenches working on this for you. That might be an engineer, that might be a tech person. You don't have to be trained professionally in whatever it is. You might just be trying to conduct experiments. Whatever that person's time is involved in this, that's where we want to recoup our take portions of their time towards the SR&ED claim there and recoup their costs. So those are direct activities. So they also have a grouping called technical support work. Again, very vague examples: design or engineering, operations research, computer programming for tech companies, operating a machine. That's welding or something if you're in the manufacturing side, or building a widget, what have you. So these are all fine for T4 employees, both of these eligible direct work and then the support work. However, where I wanted to point this out is for contractors and consultants, their activities are only eligible for direct support work. So we want to make sure we have those contracts properly wrote up to support the SR&ED claim, and also we want to make sure they're doing those aspects of the work. So I just want to point that out in there, because that's a lot of times we see companies, in a review go down that road, and they think it's, they hire someone just to do computer programming. Well, if it says that in the contract, that's something they might have issue with. However, they are doing that, but if it's more towards those iterations of testing to whatever tool or functionality they're trying to improve through that development on the back end, that's what we want to kind of see some of those details in there. So so again, all very vague terminologies here, which is, in my opinion, good, because it gives you a lot of breadth to bring in different activities to meet some of these work activities. Now, there is some excluded work that does not qualify, and we got to steer away from, like black and white in terms of what can fit and what not. Market research, sales promotion, quality control, routine testing, so on. You can go through the list here in front of you. But the ones I kind of want to touch on a little bit on here, though, which might be confusing, is when you see those ones like routine data collection or routine testing. I'll give you a specific example. We deal with about a dozen or so cannabis production facilities, and their SR&ED projects, where we see a difference between routine testing, for example, is they have to send a lot of their cannabis away to be tested for what is the THC percentage, what is the terpenes or cannabinoids, and they're doing that all year long after every grow, and they're generating data and they're using that and recording it, but it's routine. They have to do it for a regulatory body that wants them to keep good track and records of what's going on. So it might be like, hey, that's testing, that's, we're saying that for analysis, does this qualify? Well, just in that form, no. It might be a support activity for a greater project where you've gone beyond that scope of technological uncertainty. For example, You might have some new genetic strains or just some new cultivars you have in that are, in the public domain, they're hitting around that 18% THC or something like that. Well, you want to test some new lighting spectrums, some new growth media and stuff like that, some new formulations of nutrients or what have you, many different things there, to analyze the effects of this and see if you can improve or the expression of those genetics. But you're sending off the samples to be tested for the THC and everything after. Now, perhaps that routine testing that was routine just on its own in the business is now considered a support activity as part of the analysis for that particular SR&ED project, trying to express those genetics in the THC. So I think the other ones are pretty clear there, but the one that I think is confusing for people is, again, going back to that routine, that line between the uncertainty or the obstacle for SR&ED and moving forward. So that's kind of a quick overview of the technical aspects of it. I really focused on that technological uncertainty and on those points, and then the eligible expenditures, which I hope you guys can remember, that 64, 42, and 36 there. Those are the numbers you want to know. But in the end, how do we go about putting this all together, navigating the SR&ED claim? What's the process? So, there's kind of two comments I want to say in here. A lot of times, if, for example, people that are watching this right now are just hearing about it for the first time, well, this is a claims process, not a grant. So you might want to go back and look at, within that 18-month hard filing deadline and start, project identification and claim plan, project identification. So you're just going to start looking like, okay, here's the criteria. This is what we did. Does this fit the bill? Maybe we can start, piecing together our documentation and identifying and preparing the technical reports. Or on the other hand, you've already submitted a claim, or you're nothing's in the past, but you're going forward. You might want to start doing some claim planning and start, maybe focusing your documentation, your efforts, and getting your team up to speed on how SR&ED can fit into your company. So it kind of is different. Every company is different in where they enter the realm of potential SR&ED claims. But the big part there, in my opinion, is looking at that project identification. What I mean by that is on the technical side. A lot of people want to jump to the costs right away and the financial information, but you need to have that solid technical foundation there and meet that kind of criteria. If you don't have good technical legs on this, it doesn't matter what the dollars are, because you're not going to qualify because you have to fit the technical criteria. So I always encourage people to, do that analysis internally first, depending on where you are in the pathway of navigating the SR&ED claim. And then, once again, depending on where you're at, going forward and claim planning, those documentation methods, maybe you want to start a labor allocation specific to SR&ED for your company with time tracking, or maybe it's something as simple as you want to put in an SR&ED folder with those projects, specific to that project and start putting in that cloud or whatever, and start putting documents that you think support that claim in there. Or on the other end of it, you're going back and you're just looking through your information there on your server or your cloud and pulling out what could support the claim type of thing. So either way, going forward, you want to start improving these methods. That's what they want to see is people starting to track specifically to the program. We can help you with that too. So, and then ultimately you get that all done. You think you have your projects, your costing, you've filled out the applicable schedules, the tax forms for the CRA. The T661 is the SR&ED form, and you integrate that and file it with your corporate T2. So, again, going forward, you're usually e-filing it with your tax return, or like I said, if we're going back in December 31st cases that might be watching this, we might, your 2020, December 31st, 2020 year ends filed, you can do an amendment request as long as you get in before that deadline and change those schedules towards SR&ED and file those with the CRA. And then everybody asks a lot, what happens next? What's the process? How long is this going to take? When do I see the money? When's the check? Well, some people will tell you, the CRA has, deadlines published and so on, and how they're going to meet that. It really is dependent on if it's an amendment, if it's filed with e-file, or your first time claimant, what was the risk in the claim in terms of how big it was in terms of cost and stuff. So it can vary, but generally I see, within 5 business days, you can get an accepted as filed with no meeting with them. But however, there is different reviews. There can be FTCAS, first time claimant advisory services, where they come out and talk to you about your work. Or there could be in-depth technical reviews on the eligibility of the technical side, or financial reviews and asking questions about that. Either way, and I'm going to talk about that, these are important aspects where a consultant, we're going to touch on that, how they can help, should be there from the beginning to the end and really differentiate in helping you with those components. Oh, I guess that leads into why use a consultant. Again, I hope there's a lot to untangle here from from this presentation. I want you to kind of keep focus on those key, where your year end, how far you can go back, kind of a general idea of that technical side, and then how the cookie crumbles and those ITC with those dollars. But generally, why we exist as a company is it's complex. It's challenging to do, much like the same reason you get an accountant to do your T2 side of it, and why an accountant would get us to focus specifically on SR&ED. It's complex for many different reasons. So what we strive to do is navigate that process with you, getting through as smooth as possible. And at the bottom there, maximizing your SR&ED claim that is most defendable, based on those reviews, and get your return to you. Again, what I think the most important thing with a consultant, though, is, obviously getting through that first phase. But if there is a review, some consultants are like, oh, there's a review, this is horrible, it's a bad thing. Sometimes I encourage, obviously we can get things quickly as possible. But again, if we build that strong technical foundation for those project reports, having a review and winning that review on the technical side, number one, it feels good. Winning something feels good, but also establishes your credibility with the CRA, and they're going to leave you alone for years to come, within reason, as they see that your work you're doing, the type of work you're doing, is fitting the criteria. So generally, how we consult is the review prep before one of those is one of the most important things that way. And when we're really the consultant's expertise is used the most. And another one too, I hear a lot from people, though, I just put in here, is time commitments. A lot of times, like, hey, I don't have time to do this. I get it. I'm a business owner. There's a lot going on. How are you going to, you don't want to take away from your CTO or whoever, but hopefully a consultant can take a lot of that off your plate. We like to directly write the technical project reports. We don't send templates in that way. So that's how we like to consult. Again, going back to that technical review, we like to be involved in hands-on approach. So once you get to that point, we're all comfortable and on the same level of what information has been submitted, so we can all be part of the team that goes to defend that review. So yeah, so that's basically what, in a nutshell, where I see the best use of a consultant that way. Yeah, that's 45 minutes. Is kind of my goal there, around there. That's all I have for you guys today. As a quick overview of what SR&ED is and how it may be applicable to your company. I do, again, want to stress those, a couple times, think of your fiscal year end, where you guys are sitting at, and how far back you might be able to go based on that 18-month hard deadline. And just kind of explore some of those, going back to those attempts you've made, or, to the technical criteria. Maybe there's you've got a new product or innovation in your company, and it might be worth exploring if it fits a program. And then lastly, take those numbers. You can do the math on your T4 income if you have some people towards that. Is it worth your time commitments? Am I too busy to do this? Unlikely not, if you can make it worth your time in recouping those costs, kind of thing that way. So yeah, I think that's all I got for you guys today. I've been talking a lot here. If anybody wants to ask some questions or comments, and we can go from there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dana. We really appreciate you taking the time to go over all of this with us over our lunch hour. If anyone has any questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat box or pop on to your video. And if not, Dana's contact info is up on there, so I would suggest you jot that down. And if you think of any questions afterwards, go ahead and email him. Yeah. And if we don't, looks like we have one question from Nick in the chat box.
Okay, one sec here. It says, thanks for the presentation. If you don't know if you should pursue SR&ED, is it best to just start with an initial conversation with your team, or is there an expectation to know all of this up front? Very good question. Yeah, no, there's definitely no expectation to know all this up front. I mean, what I would encourage anybody is, and I'm hopefully trying to make that point at the end, is to, now you have some of this basic knowledge, is just start that discussion. You know, in our case, if for any consultant case, give them a call and explore some of those different topics more specific to the technical side. And you know, it's a relationship. You need to start understanding what what that company is doing, and there's many variables involved that way. So no, you don't have to know this all up front. Parth Patel, social services and humanities excluded. Why are they excluded? You know what? I don't have the answer to that off the top of my head. I don't know exactly why those particular sciences are excluded. You know, we recently have done some work, on the balancing of the software and the psychological research side of it. So that part is, but I could get back to you on that. I have some contacts at the CRA and get their opinion if they have one as to why those ones are excluded from there. But I don't know off the top of my head why the ruling was that ruling on that was made. Anybody else?
Okay, it looks like that is all of our questions. This will be up on our resource library. You will be able to see the recording if you want to go back. If you have any questions, you can refer back to that. And thank you again, Dana, for taking the time. We really appreciate it. And have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time. Have a good day.